Hi guys, in today's video I want to tackle a seemingly simple thing to do and something that you would rarely need it, but when you do it's a very helpful thing to know, and that is lighting a night or a dusk scene without using the help of artificial lights. Now, whenever you would start thinking about lighting a night scene, the first thing that would come into mind would be to plop in a lamp or some kind of hanging light fixture or anything that would bring a light to your scene. But in this video, I'm going to show you how you can achieve a similar result, but without using artificial lights. What I mean by this is I want to show you how you can light up a scene that's lit up by moonlight. That would look like something like basically like this image. You can see we have light coming from the surroundings, and you have light coming from the moon rays. So something like this, or maybe something like this. As you can see, these are images I've just randomly chosen from Google Images. Maybe even something like this, but in this case we can see that we have some artificial lights coming from this lamp, so just this portion. Then maybe something like the color outside exempts the color inside coming from all of those lamps, or basically something like this. So we're trying to capture something like this when the sky is like this, basically like this. Here, this image shows perfectly what we're trying to accomplish here. So how would we light our scene if the image outside is basically like this? Now, the first or easier way would be if you have a HDRI image. In that case, you can simply throw it into the scene, and hopefully it's going to bring in enough light that is going to allow you to get a decent night or dusk time lighting. But what happens if you want to have more control? Say if you want to control exactly what kind of colors are going to be coming through the window and what kind of lighting is going to be coming. Well, this is what we're going to be looking at in this video. The first thing that I would start with would be to drop in a camera in my scene. For example, I'm going to just go ahead into the V-Ray portion, choose V-Ray, choose a V-Ray physical camera. I want to get some nice angle for maybe something like this. Drop a camera anywhere in the scene, and while I still have it selected, just press Ctrl+C. That is going to position your selected camera into the viewport, and just press C, and now you're inside the camera. Alright, so we have a camera selected in our scene. This is good. Well, actually, in this case, I can just move it a tad bit up front because I might get some wall clipping from this side. So just make sure that whenever you place your camera in the scene, it's not looking at the wall, because it can give you some problems. Alright, so my scene looks like this right now. Alright, first thing is that I want to get some light coming into the scene. So I would go ahead and, well, actually before we put in some lights, I want to make sure that we can just focus on the actual light in the scene and not get distracted by the textures that we have in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead, open my I'm going to press F10, get to the render setup. In the V-Ray tab, over in the global switches over here, just scroll down. In case you're not seeing all of these options, just if you're looking at it like this, make sure you just click here twice until it opens up the expert tab. Scroll down where it says override material, just click this and click and select a V-Ray material. Any V-Ray material is going to put a new V-Ray material. What override material does is it will apply that V-Ray material or that neutral gray material to every single object in your scene. This is great when you want to just tweak out the lighting in your scene. But there is a catch. When you're using override materials, make sure that any glass that you have in your scene that has been applied with a glass material, you select it and exclude it from the override material. So I have this here, window glass 01 and window glass 02. I'm going to click on exclude, find them from the scene list over here. Let's go ahead. There we go. Window glass 1 and 2. I've previously done it. When you do it, it's going to be like this. So this side is going to be empty. So you go window glass 1 and 2 and just click these arrows over here. And once it's in this side, you can choose to exclude them both from illumination, from shadow casting, or from both. Or you can include them. In this case, we want to exclude these from the override material and click OK. So now when I go back into the camera, all of the elements in this scene have been applied with the neutral gray material. So once we have that done, let's start adding some lights. First thing I want to do is I'm going to go over in my rendering environment. There we go. Okay, I'm going to put it here. I'm going to press my material editor and I'm going to let's put it here. And for the material editor, since I want to get an image that's more or less like the one I showed you here, I want to somehow emulate this coloring where it's coming from very dark blue going towards light blue, then going towards black. The easiest way to achieve this would be to use a gradient ramp. So I'm going to choose one of my material editor balls and click get material. From here, I'm just going to scroll down to gradient ramp. Now, once I've chosen this is very important. You need to change it from texture to environment. So click on environment and instead of screen, make it spherical. So this means that now this is going to act as a spherical environment. If I click and drag it and put it in here and copy it as an instance, now I'm basically looking at this ramp over here. The way it's divided is this half over here, this middle part. This is basically the line that is going to be well, the line that's the horizontal midpoint, or the horizon. So the horizon for this is this black line here. So I want to go ahead and make this black. All right. And this top portion, this is going to be the top portion of the sky. I'm going to double click and choose color, something like blue. Make sure it's dark blue, something like this. And now with this gradient ramp in here, I need to make sure that this is facing correctly. As it is right now, it's going horizontally. I want to make it vertically. The way to do it is by just rotating this by 90 degrees. And now, if I render, I expect to receive a very, very dark image. It might even be pitch black, but let's see. I'm going to press the render production and let's see what happens. Well, actually, as it is rendering, it's not so dark, but let's see exactly why. I'm going to select my camera and this is exactly why. It's when you get your camera in for the first time, your F number here is going to be set at 8. Your shutter speed is going to be set at 200 and your film speed ISO is going to be set to 100. And your white balance is going to be either D65, but just change it to neutral. The reason why it was different on my side is basically because it remembered the settings I did from previously. So if you render it on your side for the first time, you should be getting something like this. As you can see, the entire image is pitch black and there is nothing inside that you can see that's noticeable. So in order to get rid of the blackness here that we're seeing, we need to tweak some of the parameters of our settings. So in this case, instead of tweaking the parameters for the lights, we're going to go over in the V-Ray camera, and here we're going to start tweaking some of the settings you saw me change previously. So by default, this F number is 8. This is okay if you're gonna have a well lit outside scene, but in this case, since it's a very dark scene, the F number, I'm going to decrease it to something like 5. The second thing that we would change after the F number would be the white balance. I would set it up as neutral, and then we're gonna drop over to the shutter speed. Now 200 is way too high for an interior, dark interior scene, so I'm gonna drop it down to something like 10. Even this, I think it might be too much, but let's see. I'm just gonna render out a test scene and see what we get. So render production. And now we can see something is starting to emerge in the scene. So in order to get better view of what's happening here, we are going to go over, and the film speed, or the ISO, let's change it to something like 300. See if this is going to help with the lighting issue. And we can see that we are starting to get something in the scene. But like we said, we want to make sure that we keep this dark or menacing looking kind of scene, or something that you would use for a horror scene. So we can just drop this shutter speed even lower to something like 5, so we can actually see what's happening in the scene. And with this, we are getting to basically the starting point from where we can start to build on this scene. But since our scene now is rather dark, we can see or find ways to make our scene better lit, so we can basically see what's happening in here. The way to do this would be by either playing around with the settings for the V-Ray camera, like decrease the shutter speed count or increase the film speed ISO, or we can go ahead and try and not fake but simulate more light coming into our scene by adding a few extra V-Ray lights. So let's go ahead and jump into our front viewport here, and I'm gonna go ahead and select and isolate the frames for the windows. So I'm gonna go in here in V-Ray lights, choose a V-Ray light. With the snap-on, make one light coming from one side of the window to the other, like this. Jump over here and rotate it for 180 degrees, so it's facing inwards. Just move it a tad bit up front, something like this. And make one more for this side, so another V-Ray light. From one side to the other, like this. Again, rotate it around for 180 degrees, pull it up a bit, like this, and isolation. All right, so now these two lights, by default, your multiplier should be something like this. So with 30, these subdivisions should be around 8, so I'm gonna try and go with what you would probably get by default. So again, default 30 with 8. All right, so with both of these, now if I jump in here and render my scene, I'm gonna notice one thing right away, and that is this entire scene is going to be very light or very lit up. Let's see it. As we can see, this is a far-fetched from the scene we had previously, and this entire room is way overexposed now. The reason for this is the fact that the multiplier of 30 with the settings we have for the V-Ray camera is simply way too much. So in order to get a more realistic approach to something like this, I'm going to change the default image units and I'm going to switch it over to radian power. Now, this is in watts. So let's try with a multiplier of 1 watt and go ahead, choose the other one. Again, radian power in watts with 1 and just render out one more version so we can see how it looks like now. We can see that even with a multiplier of 1 for the watts, this is way too much. Basically, the way you would see it is a normal light or a light bulb that you would buy in your store. Usually when you buy them, it has a wattage on it. And if you, for example, if you buy 100 watts bulb light, that doesn't mean it's radiating 100 watts. It's closer to 2 watts. So basically this multiplier of 1 is close to having a 50 watt light bulb. So in this case, seeing as how I don't want to have a bulb like light, I just want to have some very subtle light coming from the exterior. I'm gonna lower this to something like 0.1. This here might be too high, so 0.05. And another thing I would do is I'm gonna change the color to look more like we have something here. So take the color picker, choose the light here and go click OK. Now, so we can copy this in the other slot. So just go ahead, copy, choose the other light, set it as 0.05 as well for the multiplier. Make sure it's in watts. Paste the color here and let's render and see how this thing is going to look like right now. With this change done, now we can see that our room is starting to get some light coming in, but one of the problems that are going to happen here is that if you come in and take a closer look at the wall, you're going to see a lot of noise. Now, the problem in this case is basically whenever you are lighting up a poorly lit or dark room, you're going to need to have a lot of sampling happening in the scene in order to get a clean result. For example, let me just go ahead and select this top part over here. Now, I have my V-Ray light selected, and this is my sampling for how much samples are coming into the scene. Now, usually I would amp up this in increments of, let's say, 32 or 64, 128 or 256, but in this case I'm going to ramp it up all the way up to 1000. Now, since there isn't a lot of particles or light particles coming into this scene, this shouldn't take way too much time. So let's go ahead and just render out this portion here and see how fast this is going to be. We saw that even though we had 1000 subdivs, this portion got cleaned up of noise and it was fairly quickly. So let's go ahead one more time, run a full screen render, and we can see that by setting both of those two V-Ray lights, we ended up with a clean scene and no noise. And since the anti-aliasing didn't have to work too much, the end result was a faster and cleaner result. So now, since we did this, the only thing that we would want to add would probably be the moonlight that would come in the room if there was a moon outside. The way that we would add the moon in this image is, well, rather easy, because you can go ahead and utilize one of 3ds Max native lights. So I'm going to go over to the lights section, and this time around I'm not going to use a V-Ray light. I'm rather going to use a standard light and choose a target direct light like this. And now I just need to, well, decide where I want the moonlight to come from. If I wanted to just go on the floor, or go on the wall over here, or from this side. So just click and drag one and see what happens. We're gonna go ahead and move it upwards, so it's coming from up high. And now if I take a look, this is basically the moon. And let's check out the parameters of this light. Now, by default, for some reason, this came off rather large. If I'm not mistaken, this usually comes off something like this. So the directional light has a hotspot and a fall-off field. Basically, what this means is that whatever is in the hotspot radius is going to get 100% of the multiplier of this. And let's just set it up as white. And everything between the hotspot and the fall-off is gonna get less of the light. So in this case, I want to have a hotspot protruding through the entire scene. So go over the entire room. I want it to cover the entire room. And now one of the problems that you're gonna notice that we're gonna see is gonna be that once I start rendering out this image, I'm gonna be met with a problem where my entire room is gonna be lit up like it has been lit up for us from a sun. And let me show you how this thing is looked, and I'll explain exactly why this is happening. So if you take a look at all the hotspots here, it looks like this entire room is getting lit up by a sun. Now the reason for this is basically because whenever you are using standard lights, these lights were not optimized to be used with a V-Ray camera. So this entire room or this entire scene is getting way overexposed with the multiplier of 1. So in order to get something that would be translated well into our scene, we're gonna have to use a lot smaller multiplier, something like 0. Let's try with 0.1, see how this thing is gonna look like. This could work, but still I think that it's too light. So I would probably go something like 0.05 and render out again. And with this, we're getting somewhere. At least this is starting to look like a moonlight. Now, the thing is, when this light is coming in here, it's gonna pick up some of the diffuse color of the surrounding or the environment. So this color here is not gonna be pure white. It's more gonna be like something like this. So not dark blue, but lighter blue. So let's render and see. And there it is. We've gotten to a place where you can actually see some of the light coming from the moon into our room. Now, the only thing that I actually can see that doesn't look quite right is that this light over here is way too clearly defined. And usually light coming from the moon or moonlight is a bit more diffused, so it's a bit more fuzzy. The way that you can achieve this is you simply go over in the V-Ray shadows here and click on area shadow. Now this here, let's just take one of these places over here like this, zoom in and render. And there we go. We've gotten that fuzziness of the shadows happening here. Now we can control that fuzziness with the subdivision that is going to be for the quality. So let's go with something like 256. And the size. Basically the size is showing you exactly how far the fuzziness is going to go. For example, if I put 5, 5, and 5, this is going to be more clearly defined. Let's go ahead and check it out. There we go. That works good. And let's render out the entire scene so I can see how this thing looks right now. Okay, so what we can see now is that The light coming from the moon is properly diffused. We can see that we have enough light to notice what we have in the scene, but not too much as it would be lit up from artificial light. So this is basically how your scene would look like if it was only lit up at night by the environment and the moonlight. Now, the only thing that right now I can see that I really don't think it's right, it's the exterior. It looks to be way too blue. And before I finish, I just want to tell you guys how you can fix this issue. And this is basically an issue with the map. So what you can do is you can either jump into your gradient ramp and go over down in the output portion, or you can just convert the gradient ramp to an output, whatever works for you. So you can just drop an output map here as soon as I find it. Here it is. Keep the old map as submap. And in here, you can just lower the output amount to something like, let's say 0.3. And by doing this, I should get the external environment to be dimmer. Here we go. Now, it's not so bright that it looks like color. It's more in tune. I can even go lower. As you can see, even these places here aren't that well lit up now, and you cannot see that blue color, so we can just go 0.1, emphasize that even more, and there we go. Now we are no longer seeing that blue light. We can see that there is something happening in the sky. It's not pitch black, and there isn't much else changing in the scene. So with this, I think this would be enough to basically close up the lighting of the night scene with V-Ray. So just like I said in the beginning of this video, this is a kind of workflow that you would use if you had to make something like this, which is very rarely, because usually clients prefer to have their rooms well lit up. Even though if it's a night scene, they prefer to have a lot of lights. And by using this kind of setup to get your base for the room, you're basically giving it a nice setting. So once you start adding warmer light, you're going to get a very nice contrast or chromatic contrast between the warm and the dark lights. But I guess that would be something for future video. In any case, I hope you guys liked this video and you managed to learn something new. And if you'd like me to make more, then subscribe, comment, and share it around so we can reach more people. So take care, and I'll see you all in the next video.